Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is a program, a little sort of test initiative that was funded by Mass CEC and Department of Energy Resources a number of years back. And we're really excited to have sort of finished things up and started to see some of the performance monitoring come in and to sort of have some lessons learned at this point that I think there's a lot of very valuable things that came out of trying for this middle income group with heat pumps and with solar. So I'm going to hand it off to Gabrielle, who's going to be leading the discussion today.
Great. Thank you, Bev. And great to see everybody. My name is Gabrielle Stebbins. And the other person who's going to be doing the majority of the presentation is Bruce Harley from Bruce Harley Energy Consulting. We have quite a bit of information on these slides. Our point is not to read through them all, and you do not need to feel like you read through them all or need to read through them all during the PowerPoint. It's more so that you can reference these slides in the future and get a little bit more information. So as Bev said, we're going to give a little bit of background about the Solar Access Program. And that did not advance. Okay, so agenda, we're going to give a little bit of background on the origin of the Solar Access Program and then the Solar Access design, some results, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. We hope to have about at least 15-20 minutes for Q&A. First, before I start off on the meat of the PowerPoint, a little bit of obligatory information about Energy Futures Group. We do a lot of clean energy design, program design, cost effectiveness analysis, expert witness testimony work, etc., in a lot of different places. And that's our very cool net zero office building that Richard and I are currently sitting in. So Solar Access origin, first of all, thank you, Bev, Mass Clean Energy Center, and DOER for funding this. This was a response to a 2017 RFP. And the goal was really how to reach folks who otherwise weren't necessarily normally receiving opportunities to shift to clean energy technologies. And we took that broad overall goal in the RFP and really decided to focus in on less than or equal to 80% state median income to essentially figure out a way to, by looking at energy costs, current energy costs, figuring out where the sweet spot was to combine all of the various incentives, tax credits, and additional incentives that we were able to put together for this program so that the customer could receive a cash flow either positive or neutral for any given year loan, 10-year loan, and basically within each year of the loan product to be cash flow positive or neutral. And at the end of the 10 years to own their solar and their heat pumps, which were the focus point was to partially offset heating, not to do a whole home heating system, but to offset those two technologies. So basically at the end of the 10 years, they'd be in a much more economically, financially resilient place to be with how they heat their home. Some solar access design key elements. So first of all, it was solar plus heat pumps. They were all ductless. And a home energy audit was part of it. Weatherization was not mandatory, although a lot of these customers had some form of weatherization or multiple rounds of weatherization completed beforehand. There were many, many project partners, and there are many of them on this call today. Thank you for joining. So EFG was behind the scenes. I am going to go through who everybody was because each one of us had a different role that was really critical. So EFG was behind the scenes, sort of the program administrator. Center for Eco-Technology based in Western Mass was the initial face of the program. It's a nonprofit that essentially provided an energy coach role, did a lot of the initial upfront sales, and was sort of the neutral project manager. So neutral meaning it wasn't necessarily pushing solar or pushing heat pumps. Sunbug Solar was our solar installer. Gerard Heating and Air Conditioning was our heat pump installer. Bruce Harley Energy Consulting, who's going to present the second half of this PowerPoint, was instrumental in the analysis, in designing the financial tool that helped us estimate the size of the solar and the heat pump in comparison to existing energy costs, along with Mark Newey, who helped with that tool from Center for Eco Technology. And Pasquale Strocchia from Integral Building and Design was part of the work related to the eGauge energy monitoring units. And UMass 5 was our fantastic credit union that actually really said, sure, we'll jump in head first and both feet to offer a 10-year loan product to see how this works. As I mentioned, one of the parts that was really important for this program was to have a third-party neutral convener, that energy coach role provided by CET, Center for Eco Technology. Also part of this was we did include in our original program design an additional subsidy up to $5,500. Originally it was $4,000, but it was augmented later on in the program, so as to cover sort of the 6 months gap between when the project, when the homeowner signed on the dotted line for the project, but actually the solar was generating electricity and developing credits, and all of the heat pump rebates came through. So it's essentially a bridge subsidy, which is really critical for folks if our goal is to have a revenue neutral project for the homeowner. So that basically was a bridge gap that was provided by Mass CEC and DOER for this particular initiative. In terms of customer recruitment, CET led the way on this and literally threw everything at the wall. And I'll give more information on what worked and what didn't in a moment. We also offered a savings guarantee. This essentially, basically after a year of having the heat pump and the solar operating, if the homeowner found that they were consuming more than we had estimated them to be consuming, and if it turned out that it wasn't a result of, say, having 5 more people move into the house, we would refund the cost difference between the actual consumption compared to the projected savings. And I'll give some details in terms of what we found with that offer as well. In terms of evaluation, measurement, and verification, or EM&V, we did have some quality assurance, quality control review process, generally very good findings. As I mentioned, we had eGauge energy monitoring units for 15% of the sites. Actually, it was about 20%. This was real-time data monitoring of the solar and heat pump performance. And at the program start, we actually had no budget set aside for the evaluation, but we ended up, for a variety of reasons, not be able to achieve 100 installations, and we achieved instead of 49. So we used the remaining budget to be able to collect billing data and to complete the billing analysis that Bruce Harley completed and we'll discuss later on. So as I mentioned, our real goal for this program, yes, solar plus heat pumps and ideally weatherization. Our real goal was to have this be revenue neutral from project start because of the demographics that we were serving. So we bundled all available incentives, ITC, solar tax credit, SREX, and then SMART. The one that I mentioned initially, that solar access program 6-month payment subsidy, was critical. We also pre-negotiated a discount from Sunbug as well as Mitsubishi. These were critical and quite a bit like Solarize and the Heat Smart programs you guys have offered in Massachusetts in the past. In terms of the loan product, it was one single product to make it easier for the homeowner, 10-year fixed rate loan. It financed 100% of the project costs. So they didn't have to go anywhere else to try and piecemeal the solution to how to pay for this project. We also did, to allay concerns of UMass 5, provide a loan loss reserve. This was a sliding scale default guarantee for the lender based on the borrower's creditworthiness. We also offered a no loan payment for 3 months, a deferred payment process. And then the solar and the heat pump financing were based off of what was already existing. In terms of solar access design for implementation, so the reality is the multiple program steps and partners that I have here doesn't even highlight it. I mean, there must have been like 40 to 45 if we roll in everything that CET did and Sunbug did and that Gerard did, and bless their hearts for dealing with this program, as well as UMass 5. But that just gives a sense. I mean, if you think about just a photovoltaic system quality assurance, getting out a town inspector, and then having the electrician come in, and then having the engineer check out the roof structure. I mean, the number of steps to actually make this sort of one overarching offering is really mind-boggling, for lack of a better word, and requiring many, many handoffs, hence the picture in this slide here. And also, as a result, creating a lot of different challenges, and some of those challenges, some of the obstacles that the Solar Access Program experienced were really, honestly, outside of our control. Our first loan was approved in October 2018. A month later, we saw SREC shift to SMART. A couple of months later, UMass 5 said, look, we need to actually make sure that we're putting a little bit more structure around what these loans look like. So that loan structure changed a little bit. In March of 2019, one of the heat pump rebates ended. Then it was decided that we weren't supposed to, or we weren't going to be offering this offering to natural gas customers. Then the solar loan ended. And then, as you might imagine, just as anyone who's ever done a project on their home, there's a lag time for all of these pieces. If it's not the solar permission to operate, it's the local inspection, it's the cold climate rebate coming in. Then there was this thing called a pandemic. So we had many, many implementation changes on top of all those program handoffs. So in terms of access, the solar access results, I just highlight how the budget ended up landing. The largest percentage of budget to address all those handoffs and all of the external policy changes and a pandemic, 26% of the budget actually went to contractor liaison and team coordination. But right after that was 24% for customer acquisition. It was a massive effort to find and secure and convince participants that this wasn't too good to be true, and to, yes, participate. 16% went to that 6-month payment subsidy. Every participant needed a solar access 6-month subsidy. 14% went to program administration, 11% went to QA, energy monitoring, reporting, and then 9% went to the loan loss reserve and the savings guarantee. I say really 0% because we have not had a single savings guarantee claim called, and that's also true for 2 other projects that the Energy Futures Group has managed. Both of them based in Vermont. We've offered the savings guarantee for a program called Zero Energy Now, and then for another loan program that Richard Fazy had been involved with. And we've never seen anyone actually claim, actually, that's not true. We had one claim for about $48, if I recall correctly. And on the loan loss reserve side, similarly, from what I heard from UMass 5 last week, not one claim was required as of yet, and half of all of the loans have been paid out. Just a little bit of quick summaries. Otherwise, in terms of tax credit uptake, 26 of the 49 participants did take some federal tax credit. It was all within year 1. None of them could actually take, none of them had a large enough tax appetite to take the full 30%. And 33 out of 49 participants were able to take the state incentive, the state credit that was available. Out of 1,100 leads we ultimately landed with 49 projects. 25 were sent to low-income programs. 225 were sent just to Sunbug Solar, which resulted in about 17 actual jobs, according to Sunbug. 223 or so went to Gerard, of which apparently, I believe, 4 resulted in real jobs. And from sort of an anecdotal back and forth with CET, had we widened the 60 to 80% state median income population range, just a little bit up to like 90 or 100% and a little bit down to like 50%, we would have been able to bring back in about 50% of the leads that we ultimately screened out. Just so you know, other reasons for why customers were not able to be participants. Some of them needed a larger 6-month subsidy in order for their loan to meet the loan requirement, so larger than that $5,500. Some of them didn't have a good enough solar site. Some of them had a poor home layout. Sometimes the customer was just not interested. We had 90 to 100% of customers were satisfied or very satisfied. 88% of the customers think they saved energy, 90% think they saved money, and 98% think they increased the value of their home. A little bit on terms of customer recruitment, and this is actually not a needle in a haystack, it's a pin in a haystack, but thanks to Ian Finlayson for highlighting our special name for this program. It was the needle and haystack program, and 49 out of 1,100 leads. How did we actually recruit customers? So the things that worked, CET built upon existing relationships and the trust as a nonprofit in the area that had been operating for many years and decades. Partnering with other organizations such as the Town of Lee, UMass 5, utilities. The Town of Lee sent out a letter that, from that letter, many people reached out and said, hey, we're interested. So did the Department of Energy Resources. Co-branding events, and also CET went to about 100 plus events, community efforts per year. So they really talked this up in person. In terms of outreach approaches, direct mail, not very effective, 6 leads out of 11,000 letters. However, as I noted, partners sending out the notices on CET's behalf did work. In terms of social media, that was very effective at $20 a day. Frequent small changes in the messaging actually resulted in frequent small surges in leads. Customer testimonials are very effective, and they're also very usable across multiple mediums, website, social media. Local print, not as effective in terms of paid media, but earned media showing a local customer was effective. In terms of solar access results, installations, there, as I said, 49 sites in Western Mass, 1,100 leads, so a 0.04% lead rate. The installations were completed in August 2018 to July 2020, but the majority were February 2019 to June 2020. And a couple of medians for you. So the median 6-month subsidy, as I mentioned, it could go up to $5,500. It fell around median of $4,000. The solar installation costs median was $31,500. The heat pump median cost was $6,400, and the loan median was $39,500. And I'm not sure why this is coming up, but I'll give you a little bit more information on customer recruitment. Some challenges. A lot of people felt that, first of all, the solar marketplace is pretty crowded. People assumed the solar access program was too good to be true. Also at the time in 2018, people didn't really know what a heat pump was. And as I mentioned, reaching the 60 to 80% state median income was really quite challenging. As I mentioned, direct mail, not too effective, but what was helpful is it did allow for identifying geographic areas that met our population focus, that 60 to 80% state median income. Social media did initially allow us to target our demographic, and then they removed that feature. So initially it was really helpful and then not so helpful, although those small changes did still lead to small surges in uptake in leads. And then again, targeting the geographic areas with the 60 to 80% state median income population was helpful. In terms of ad messaging, what worked? Leaning on the nonprofit status, as I mentioned, really did work. This helped differentiate the fact that CET was offering something that wasn't too good to be true. It was real, and how to separate what that offer was compared to just a solar offer or just a heat pump offer, and that it was and both one loan, neutral cash flow outcome. Comfort performed much better than any other focus. Better than save money, better than save energy, really comfort. So CET used things like Beat the Heat this summer with solar access, a state-funded program. And similarly, leaning on that state-funded, utility-funded helped. Social media allowed for a dynamic creative, so basically uploading multiple photos and messages to test which combination worked and then to hone in on what was really working at that time for that market demographic. And again, the customer testimonials worked well. And with this, I will pass it to Bruce.
Hey, can people hear me? Right, my chat window got stuck open. Okay. Yeah, the first thing you'll notice is the median price per system is a little bit different from what was on Gabrielle's slide, but pretty close. I think we just used a slightly different source of data. The main point here is that the size of the PV systems on average was about 10 kilowatts. The cost was fairly high, and that was because there was a lot of cases where there was structural work or roof work that needed to be done before the system could be installed. And so, you know, that kind of added to the price, but it had to be done in order to get the project off the ground. So that's just something to keep in mind with initiatives for lower income populations, because if there's deferred maintenance, you may run into these kinds of problems. Electric panel upgrades is another one for both for PV and the heat pumps. I will note there was not very good correlation between the size of the PV system and the pre or projected kilowatt hours per house. So there was a comment earlier that I had designed the whole tool to help size the PV systems, and that's not really true. I wasn't involved. My calculations weren't involved in the PV system sizing at all. And I have a feeling that's not really borne out by any information other than just that's my impression, that probably most of these PV systems are sized based on what could fit on the house rather than what the projected need after the heat pump installation really was. Next slide. Sort of, Gabrielle? Yeah, thanks. So to summarize the heat pump installations, median price of the heat pumps per house was $6,600. On a per size basis, it was about $5,000 per ton. Now, the top title here showing the average house had installation of heat pumps totaling 22,000 BTU per hour capacity. That's the 5-degree Fahrenheit capacity. So that's roughly the capacity at design conditions. Many of these houses did have more than one head or more than one heat pump installed. A lot of them also had just a single one zone system. But you know, the typical, you know, rule of thumb that I would use if I'm just going to say what's a typical heating load for a house in this climate for existing houses is about 40,000 BTUs per hour. So on average, these could supply or could be expected to supply about half of the design heating load. 8 of the homes had multi-zone systems, and there's been a bit of discussion about how multi-zone systems compare with single-zone systems. And so we have a little bit of information in the analysis about that. These bar graphs at the bottom showing the size of the installations are not just showing the size of individual heat pumps, but the total capacity of the heat pumps per house. So the vast majority of them were between 1.5 and 2.5 tons. Quite a few of them were 1-ton system, and then there was a small group of 5 that were above 2.5 tons. Slide. So the energy analysis that I conducted on this project, we had data on 38 homes. It wasn't all complete data, but there were some houses out of the 49, there were 11 that just had either, for whatever reason, no data available or insufficient data or other barriers like customers who were non-responsive after, you know, a couple of years' time. They had moved away. In a couple of cases, equipment failed, monitoring equipment failed. So the HVAC system analysis was limited further to 28 homes. And out of the 38, 8 of them had a significant amount of solid fuel use. If people have a wood stove or pellet or coal stove, it's really hard to get accurate information about how much fuel they burned, and so we can't really look at what they used before and what they used after, and how the heat pump impacted that. There was one case where we had anecdotal information that fed into the analysis and I could use, but in 8 of them, they just weren't analyzable because of the solid fuel use. 2 of them just had data that made no sense or was too small to use. 10 of the 28 had e-gauge monitors installed and operating. There were a total of 15 e-gauges installed in the project, so it's actually close to 30% overall. But a couple of them went offline or had other problems, and a couple of the e-gauges were in the group that had solid fuel use. So 10 of them had e-gauge monitors that we could actually use to do analysis. And that was continuous data logging of the heat pump energy, the PV, electric in and out, and the whole house electricity consumption. So those gave us a little bit higher confidence in the heating and cooling analysis, but overall, all 28, had pretty good results. So we did billing analysis for all of the rest of the information, including the pre-existing operation of the house and for the HVAC for the fossil fuel after the heat pumps were installed. Slide. So this is just a quick example of what some of that analysis looks like. On the left side is the pre-heat pump and PV electric consumption. You can see the daily outdoor temperature varying from cold to warm on the right, on the bottom axis, and the electric use showing a small component of heating. There's more electric use as the temperature gets colder. So the house had an estimated heating season consumption of 1,360 kWh, cooling 296, and a base of 5,412 kWh per year. On the right, you can see the e-gauge data, which is not monthly. It's actually, in this case, it's shown on a daily basis, although we had 1-minute data if we needed it. And there's a lot more information there. So you can see this is only heat pump use for heating in the red and heat pump use for cooling in the blue. The heating consumption went up to 2245. The cooling consumption went down a bit. Presumably they were not using a window air conditioner anymore because they had this efficient heat pump. And the base energy consumption didn't change much at all. Next slide. So basically we did a statistical analysis like that on all of the fuel data before and after. So if they had propane or oil bills, in a few cases we did have gas customers, and all of their electric bills for a period of time before the installation and then for a period of time afterwards. All of this is normalized to standard weather, so we weren't looking at the variations in climate or in weather that happened from year to year. So all of the analysis gets sort of turned into what we would expect to happen in a normal year, and so that you can compare before and after, and you can compare one house to another on the same basis. We were able to estimate the heat pump efficiency for those 28 houses, and the COP, which is basically a numerical efficiency where a COP of 1 equals 100% efficient, which would be like electric resistance heat. And we calculated that by taking the saved fuel from the billing analysis multiplied by the fuel efficiency and dividing that by the input electricity energy of the air source heat pump. We also did a brief analysis on the PV system performance, which really was just how much electricity did the PV systems produce in a year. Most of these systems had 2 or 3 years of daily data that we got from Sunbug's data logging that they installed with all these systems. So it's a really robust record of what was produced, and we had a couple or 3 years for almost all of these houses of PV production. So although a couple were missing, it was very, very strong. So here are the results. On the HVAC side, average fuel savings per house, 32 million BTUs per year, about 46% of the total pre-fossil fuel energy use, which is pretty good for not targeting these houses as being full replacement heat pumps. If we look at the 19 out of the 28 houses that had what I deemed consistent heat pump use, they actually saved, quite a bit more, 40 million BTUs, and a bit over 60% of the fuel consumption. 19, let's see, heating consumption, 3,700 kWh, which was pretty close to what was projected in all of our pre-analysis. 19 of the houses with consistent use used about 4,500 kWh per year. The estimated COP implied by the analysis was about 2.3, which is really, really quite good, I would say, and it's very consistent with other studies of this sort. And I will note that the COP was virtually the same for multi-zone and single-zone systems. As a percentage of the HSPF rating, we had about 66%, and that's sort of expected because the HSPF rating on the heat pumps is based on a warmer climate than Western Massachusetts. So this is also pretty consistent. And I think what was interesting here is that the multi-zone systems had a higher percent of HSPF sort of result than the single zone systems. I think there were only 3 multi-zone systems in the group that we were actually able to analyze. So it's not a very big sample, but it's there. I just want to double check, can people hear me, because the Zoom crashed on my computer.
Yes, we can.
Go on. Okay, I'll follow the slides on my own PowerPoint. So are we on the next slide?
Yes.
So basically, one of the things that isn't too hard to sort of get intuitively is that people who use their heat pump more saved more fuel. And that's a pretty significant thing to note because, you know, in other studies we have found, like in the 2015 Mass and Rhode Island study, one of the main reasons that people didn't save a lot was that they weren't using their heat pumps very much. I think this group used their heat pumps more, but you can certainly see on the left, the more they used the heat pump on the x-axis, the more fuel was offset on the y-axis. It was not really driven by the amount of heat pump capacity, and I didn't show a slide, I didn't show a chart with that, but it's notable that it's a kind of a very modest relationship between the total heat pump sizing that went into the house and the amount of fuel that was offset. It was really more based on behavior and how people use the heat pump. And I would also say on the right side, I looked at the total heating cost of fuel and electricity that they were using for heating before the heat pump got added, and on the y-axis, the amount of fuel offset. And there was a pretty strong relationship there. So it does suggest that people who had high heating costs before were more motivated to use their heat pumps and get more savings than the people who didn't have such high costs. Again, not too surprising, but worth looking at. Next slide. On the photovoltaic side, annual PV produced electricity was a little over 10,000 kWh. And when you consider the median size of the array was 10 kW, that's, you know, I've heard that rule of thumb, 1,000 kWh per peak kW in New England for a couple of decades. It ended up being about 105% of the projected PV production in our financial tool. So that was pretty good results. About 115% of the whole house electricity consumption. And I'll get to that a little bit on the next slide, but basically there was a little more PV capacity than people were able to use or than people did actually use in these houses. The excess generated on average for the group of 28 houses was 625 kWh, which is not huge. But as you'll see on the next slide, there's a big variation in the amount. Well, it's actually even on this chart, 5,300 of excess to not enough, 7,660. So the large cluster of net kWh is is on the negative side, but it's close to zero. So between 0 and 1500 or 1600 kWh excess PV per year is the largest bar there, and then it kind of drops off predictably on both sides. I will note that probably the two best things that people could do to use some of that PV would be to use their heat pumps more, and then they would save more energy, and also you know, think about either adding another heat pump or, you know, at some point getting an EV charger, and then they could do that. Next slide on the savings. As far as greenhouse gas and customer savings are concerned, the annual savings in pounds of carbon equivalent was about 10,000. That was 96% of what we projected. So we did a pretty good job predicting what the carbon offsets were going to be, and fuel and electricity totaling around $2,500 of savings for the customers. It was 109% of what we projected. We were pretty conservative in our projections. We didn't want to go whole hog and say these people are going to save more money than they were likely to, and so that being conservative paid off, and these folks did a little bit better. When I recalculated the savings at today's fuel prices, including the recent increases in electric rates, actually the total savings went up by nearly 50%. I should say it's 148% of the original savings, not 148% increase. It's a 48% increase, and we should correct that slide. And I will note that people who did have excess PV production obviously didn't realize all of those dollar savings, but they still could by using their heat pumps more. PV accounting for 75% of the greenhouse gas savings and 92% of the dollar savings. So the PV really drives this financially, and that actually is why, when I answered one of the questions offline earlier, why it was hard to get to whole house air source heat pumps, because the dollar savings and trying to make this revenue neutral for the customer got difficult, because with a heat pump you're a lot closer to, you know, paying for electricity for heat instead of fossil fuels, and you're not saving a ton of dollars there, even though you're saving some. So the PV ended up really driving this, but the heat pumps were still important, and increasing the amount of heat pump that you're using increases both the greenhouse gas offsets and the dollar savings substantially. I looked at the unsubsidized cost of the heat pumps and the PV, and it turns out the heat pumps were a little cheaper per carbon saved than the PV systems. This was just the gross price of the system installed in the house. Heat pumps only looking at the heating impact, because the cooling impact was pretty close to neutral. The subsidy cost, that 4,000 or so per house, ended up being, you know, an order of magnitude smaller. So just to sort of look at that from a different angle. Couple more slides on the energy lifetime savings. We put this in the proposal, and we had estimates of lifetime savings. We hit 93% of lifetime savings on the greenhouse gases, and 107% of the lifetime savings, dollar savings per house. Again, these are based on all the same prices that were used in the proposal and in the initial calculations and projections per house, so that everything's being compared on the same basis. Last one for me is the takeaways on energy. We've got lifetime savings and dollar projections. Dollars were exceeded and the greenhouse gas nearly achieved. And I think if the heat pumps were utilized more in all of the houses, you know, on average, certainly some of them could have used them a lot more. Both of these would have increased, and we probably would have pretty much hit the greenhouse gas projections. The dollar savings also being conservative, because they were based on a fixed lifetime energy prices, and I just gave one example of how those would go up over time. Electric savings versus fuel savings. Again, most of the dollar in greenhouse gas savings coming from the PV, But the fact that increasing the heat pump use increases the dollar savings and greenhouse gas offsets even more. So finding creative ways to make the heat pump installations more cost effective and to allow for sizing the heat pumps to offset more of the fuel and really hopefully make people comfortable eliminating their fossil fuel systems entirely would really have a big benefit here. Incidentally, there was one customer out of the 28 who literally stopped using their propane heating system and didn't get any more deliveries. So in one case, their post installation went to zero on the fossil fuel. And of course, being that there's a limit on the dollar savings if the PV is bigger than it needs to be on the annual basis, could be eliminated by adding running their heat pump more or adding more heat pump capacity. And to me, if these same customers were able to take advantage of that $10,000 to $15,000 incentive for whole house air source heat pump installations that are available now, which weren't available then, they could get to that point with their existing heat pumps, I'm sure, in most cases with something that would be less than that $10,000 to $15,000 rebate. And so these people of modest means would, I think, be able to get to whole house heat pump without having to invest any more cash into their project at all. And they would certainly be much better positioned to use all of that PV capacity that's been installed. And there's a few more takeaways that we're going to go back over to Gabrielle. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce. A couple of more programmatic takeaways. So what worked with the Solar Access program? The customers really appreciate having an energy coach. They really appreciate feeling like they're working with someone who is coming from a neutral perspective and who can help explain things, from start to finish. However, the energy coach needs technical training. It's really challenging for the solar installer, the heat pump installer, whomever they may be, to have a third party play that role, particularly if the solar and the heat pump installer, are looking at the site from a different perspective. In our particular case, both Sunbug and Gerard went out on site and helped train the energy coach, but this is something to be really mindful of in the future, particularly as an opportunity to ratchet perhaps training for the Mass Save heat pump installer network. Is there an opportunity to loop in some of the, a broader training that might be available from an energy coach discussion point? And I just want to note, actually, Energy Futures Group is currently working on a project funded by the Department of Energy to develop a national certificate that would essentially provide sort of this whole home building science perspective of how you can combine solar plus heat pumps plus weatherization to get to as affordable and clean and resilient heating as possible. What also worked with Solar Access is combining technologies. But frankly, one of the things we really did want to have was a requirement for weatherization in our RFP. We just, in our response to the RFP, but it added a layer of complexity that we weren't able to achieve in this particular program. And also, if it's not, if it's as you're working on the Mass Save heat pump installer network, even just having someone say, hey, your solar, your roof might be perfect for solar, is important, particularly with this area of demographic, given the fact that if they're moving forward with heat pumps and it really can help them financially, it's a real win-win if that's a possibility for the person on site to expand that conversation point. In terms of the savings guarantee, it assuages homeowners' fears and risks of whether or not the project investment is worth it. Since no savings guarantee claims were made, one question might be, why not offer it regularly? And in terms of the loan loss reserve, that assuages the lender fear and risk. Again, no loan loss reserve claims were made, but they're costly. We are still having that 100, 150K plus or so set aside in case something is pulled from it. So is it needed in that way? One question would be, would a larger subsidy be a less expensive approach to lessening the risk of the loan default? Other programmatic takeaways, the 6-month subsidy made investment cash neutral. That is clearly no longer available. Neither is the solar loan middle income subsidy. So how can this gap be filled if future initiatives are offered so that we can really provide this fuel price certainty, particularly for this population range. And then again, pretty reasonable fuel saving, 50% for partial system replacements, but so much more is possible with customer follow-up. We do plan on following up with all 49 of our customers just to say, hey, use your heat pumps more. And by the way, here's our slide presentation. Most incentive programs are not able to and do not necessarily go back to the customer after the installation. It's a huge value add to connect that loop back. And finally, incentives like the Mass Save Whole Home might want to consider incorporating post-install checkups a winter after the install. However, all of these takeaways really require policymakers, utilities, regulators, administrators, providers to really coordinate consistently. Serving these hard to reach populations and creating a worthwhile business opportunity for service providers requires streamlining and combining offerings. This is challenging. If you recall how much time and effort was spent to coordinate all the partners, either the business is doing that or the customer is doing that. So we're either going to lose customers or we're not going to have businesses actually be able to make a viable profit. So we need to figure that out as program designers and program implementers. We need to figure out how to reduce the time and complexity in the approvals and handoffs. Leveraging that trust factor associated with state nonprofit partners and bringing in the customer testimonials is huge. Particularly, everybody's talking about the inflation, the recession. This is going to become even more challenging in the near term. Partnering with local community embedded organizations can help with that. What was successful certainly is increasing the affordability and the cash flow outcome through this financing array of offerings. Minimizing policy changes and increasing consistency of offerings is really critical. If we want to see more of this type of targeting this population demographic range, we need to reward the early adopters, the service providers willing to work through this in a consistent fashion over multiple years before easing down on incentives. We really need to see that the market has stepped in before we can say, okay, we're done. Sell comfort. It really seems to resonate. Otherwise, people wouldn't be updating their kitchens before they weatherize their homes. And allowing for program flexibility, listening to the customers and the service providers. If they say it's not working, it's not. As Bruce alluded to, serving middle to lower income homeowners, this is just an example of how you have to respond to that program flexibility if you end up running into panel issues, roof issues. So some pictures of some of the homes and some quotes, and this is our last slide. So Bev, if you want to take it over to Q&A.
Yeah, thanks. So much information here. Really great lessons. A couple people asked about getting slides. Everybody who registered for this, we are going to send slides out and a link to the recording, which please send this on to other people who might be able to learn from it. And then we had a number of questions in the Q&A, and so I wanted to give Gabrielle and Bruce a chance to answer some of those first, or Richard, if you want to jump in. Then if anyone has questions that they didn't put in the chat yet, but they would like to ask live, please go ahead and use the raise hand function and we can open you up to questions live.
So we only see 2 questions.
So I think a number got answered in the Q&A, but you might want to go back to those. So Maggie was asking how many participants installed whole house heat pumps, and I think Richard answered that, or maybe Bruce did.
But basically, none of them were really intended to be, were designed as whole house systems, but a few of them either managed to get there or were close.
And then Maggie also asked about the PV systems, if they were sized to meet the annual electric load or larger than the electric load. So I think the point was to try and be on target, but they underused their heat pumps. Is that right, Bruce?
I think that that's largely true. I also think maybe that they weren't sized all that carefully according to the projected load, because when I look back at what the projected load was and the size of the heat pumps, there wasn't that close of a relationship. That could also result from the fact that many houses perhaps had a limited amount of space to put PV in a practical sense, and so that would have thrown off the relationship between the projected and the installed. But either way, you know, there was clearly some excess PV capacity that could be better used, and I think a lot of that is driven by people could use their heat pumps more, and then they'd also save more fuel.
And then Alyssa was asking about budget, what percent were mass save and other leverage funds in the funding totals. And my understanding is like none of what you showed like the mass save or the mass CEC incentive that came back to them, right? It was just sort of like the subsidy for the 4,000 to 5,500 for the 6 months. Is that correct? Right. So like if you had to think about how this was subsidized, there's a number of things like there's. So the solar loan program was around and it had that middle income subsidy while it was around. So there's that. There's this 6 month payment part to make people whole so that it's not a cash flow negative investment for them that had to be filled. There was the mass save heat pump incentive, the mass CEC heat pump incentive for a while, but not all of them. And then, I mean, it's just, I think the biggest thing is this customer acquisition and the coach function, right? Like those were actually budget line items in this grant. And it was, you know, customer acquisition was fairly expensive here because of the narrowness of the income range being defined. I mean, I think part of the lesson here to me is that when you're targeting people, they don't self-identify as middle income or low income or even high income, like, you know, and so handing off between programs is a little bit difficult, and especially being bounced back and forth between categories is real. You lose people very quickly, I think. But that's definitely something that I learned. I don't see hands up. I'm sort of surprised. I know people who are on here who have a lot of questions.
There are a couple open questions. I don't know if you can see those.
Oh yeah.
Can't see them.
How much did the pre-solar barrier roof replacements, upgrades, resolution cost on average? So that's a good question. So the solar number looks high to me, and I know that that included electrical upgrades and roof repair to get the solar there, because you know basically we followed the same rules that the solar loan program or the federal tax credit. Like anything that you do to make it solar ready could be included there. It's not something I think we teased out here. Is that right?
No, we did not. But you know, anecdotally, this was sort of one of the reasons why I put that last bullet is program flexibility, because anecdotally, what would happen is we would the customer would sign on the dotted line, and then you know the loan process would start. Sunbug would go out, do the next site visit, and then the third-party structural engineer would go out and say, oh my gosh, you need to replace 3 of these roof rafters. At which point, Sunbug would reach out to me and say, what do we do? The loan's already like been processed and the homeowner is, you know, so this is where the program flexibility, particularly with this population range, is really critical. So I would email Bev and be like, Bev, we have another one. So off the top of my head, I'd say, you know, if you remember that solar access 6 month range could go up to 5,500, but the median was about 4,000. We had one that was at 10,000, and Bev approved that one, but she said never again. And then we had a few other, like 3 or 4 that ranged between like 5,500 to like 7,500, and they were all sort of like, whoa, big issue. So not necessarily a massive percentage of the 49 sites, but a big financial impact when they did pop up.
So Ian has a wonderful question in here, which is, if you could do this program again, how would you change the program design? And would you still co-deliver solar PV and heat pumps? And I would say yes. I mean, to me, the solar became so much more important to this calculation, just seeing these data than I even thought a month ago, honestly. And I think the savings guarantee, which I think you can really only provide, at least at current prices of fossil fuel, you can really only do that when you pair the two together. But it would be, to me, like, so if I ran it again, I guess I would love to see more heat pump and solar companies team up. I guess I would train the heat pump person to do some basic solar screening when they're on site, instead of having a third-party Center for Ecotechnology. That's the way I would go. I see Gabrielle nodding her head.
Yeah, definitely I would combine solar and heat pump. I mean, when I think about this target population and what's going on with OPEC and oil prices and gas prices, giving folks this cushion as they're looking at a potential recession is just so critical. And we wouldn't necessarily get there just with the heat pumps or just with the solar. So combining the two, definitely. And I really think it's figuring out, for the homeowner, it's figuring out that energy coach role. And how to make that be someone who is technically proficient, but also really able to look at the site from the perspective of both the solar installer and the heat pump installer.
And I mean, I think Solar Coach, because this program didn't really address weatherization, there's the first assessment for, if we think of Mass Save now, right? There's the initial assessment that's for weatherization and maybe teasing heat pumps. But I think even home performance contractors have to say there's other heat pump installers. So then the heat pump installer plus the solar, to me, is a good pairing with the weatherization at the front, teasing out all the options kind of concept.
Yeah, I just want to add that this was, we had one business model that we tried out here with one solar company and one heat pump company. And it's not necessarily the right one or the best one. It was what we tried out. So, there are likely other approaches and relationships that could be tested. And then the only other point I want to make too is that this was, Gabrielle mentioned UMass 5 and how much flexibility they provided. Whether there are other lenders out there that would be willing to take on this sort of project and work with the reamortization partway through as tax credits come through, this was really complicated. Would we do it again? It's a great opportunity because pairing heat pumps and PV makes a lot of sense, but I don't know that this would be the ultimate business model, and maybe there's an opportunity to try out some other ones to see what could potentially work better.
So we're nearing the end of time, but I think the panelists can stay on if your question didn't get answered yet. And we will have this recorded. So if you want to go back and listen to answers of questions later, you can do that. Thanks to everybody who joined, and we'll just keep answering questions. I see Helena asking about the cost of the PV being so much more expensive. So remember, these are middle income, right? 60 to 80%. And what that means is a lot of them don't have a lot of money to maintain roofs. And they probably have not updated their electrical. So I think Ben, who is the solar installer, was saying in the chat that anecdotally there were this is a much higher percentage needed electrical upgrades and roof repair or structural reinforcement than the average solar install. And this is a function of aiming towards this middle. And honestly, when you go to the low income, because ABCD does sort of similar program that we provided some funding for, the number of roofs that need replacement goes up even higher when you get below 60. It gets to be a really high number.
Yeah, Bev, I'd like to add, part of it is about the repairs, but also, PV is more expensive than the systems that we were putting in for the heat pumps. And the upside is the PV produces pure savings, whereas the heat pumps, you have to buy more kilowatt hours to use the heat pump in order to save on your fossil fuel. So there's a piece of what Helena wrote that's not quite right. The 6,500, that's a median. And, in my experience, to get to a whole house air source heat pump retrofit, you're probably talking, for most houses, 15,000 is probably on the low end. And for most houses, it's probably $20,000 to $30,000. So it's going to be comparable to the prices of the PV system. And we were limited, as I said in the answer before, and by the financial design of this project, because the PV systems were producing sort of more pure savings, and the air source heat pumps were, more balanced. We just didn't have the money to, it didn't pencil out to install larger air source heat pump systems. So I think really going towards the whole home retrofit incentive, structure that's out there now is going to be the only way to see something like that work. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be paired with PV, because the PV is really what I think made this whole thing work well for customers, like Gabrielle said before.
Meg had another question about to Gabrielle, asking the weatherization you said was too complicated to include in this pilot. Do you see a path forward for how that should be addressed?
Yeah, I just answered. Thank you for clarifying that. Definitely, I see a path forward. It was too complicated for us in terms of our response to the RFP. We had reached out to like 7 solar installers and like 3 heat pump installers, and we got a yes from Sunbug, and we got a yes. So for us to figure out how to loop in weatherization by the deadline of the RFP, it was really more for our proposal that we couldn't get it done. But definitely yes, and I think it's critical. I mean, particularly as we start to see strategic electrification based off of all of Massachusetts goals, we need to ensure that we are installing heat pumps in a way that will minimize the potential for winter peak as much as possible, and really control for that.
And Mary was asking about rooftop solar and low income. What do you think about generalizations that solar isn't good for low income? I guess I have some thoughts, which it's definitely more expensive because you're probably going to have to replace the roof. And I do know from ABCD's program, you really should pre-fund, at about 10 years, the inverter is going to go out, right? Or maybe it's a little longer, but a lot of times those customers can't handle that 10 years in, or maybe they aren't even there, and it's another low-income customer. So pre-funding, basically having an insurance plan on the solar is important. Some people will say that a power purchaser agreement is easier because the maintenance and all the different things that might happen, when a squirrel bites the wires or whatever, and it has to be redone. I do think pre-funding maintenance is good, but I mean, I think the numbers are very clear. Ownership is way more beneficial than power purchaser agreements in terms of saving people money. It probably does help shield people from drastic increases, right, in costs. So that maybe there's a function there for putting it in, but you're only going to save 10% with a power purchaser agreement. It's not really that much.
Well, and I think key also, if we think about energy burden, and if we think about how do we want to rectify that challenge holistically, and not have to necessarily go back to it again and again and again, which, as we all know, administratively has, in the long run, a much larger cost, then it makes sense to actually look at, all right, well, if the roof needs to be replaced, how do we address that? And then how do we combine solar plus weatherization plus heat pump? Because ultimately it costs more if you go back 15 times over 30 years or 10 times over 30 years.
Mary was also pointing out complaints about exploitations of PPAs. Same thing with third-party energy providers, right? That, I think that's part of why it was so hard to get uptake, honestly, is it's not that the solar market is so crowded already, it's that people have been flooded with calls of fake fraudulent stuff and are very suspicious. Like Gabrielle was saying, that it's too good to be true. This is why, I mean, I really think vetting the partners that are like in this case, right, we added a lot of basically like what Solarize or Heat Smart would be, where the installers for both were already very well vetted for, you know, being good actors. So you didn't have to worry about that, and you didn't have to like cost 3 different ones at each one. It was all like sort of packaged together. I mean, I do think that that kind of, you know, vetting is really important. Maybe it's localities that do that. Maybe it's community organizations. I don't know, but like, I know
Well, that's why the 3 pieces, you know, partnering with like the town of Lee, having the state, you know, having Mass CEC and the DOER logos there was critical. And then also having CET as a nonprofit embedded, you know, historical institution in the area. Those pieces really added so much, as well as the customer testimonials.
And Gina was asking about, was the low-income electric rates R2 prior to getting these upgrades? If not, was there a variance between savings for R2 customers and other low-income customers? This is above the R2 rate, right?
There was one customer out of the 29 that I looked at in detail that had R2. All the rest of them were R1.
If Sunbug were still on, but I believe Ben had to leave, when we started crunching the numbers, it became more challenging for R2 than R1, if I recall correctly. But
there might have been more in the pipeline, but they didn't work out financially, is what you're saying.
Yep.
And that makes sense, because the dollar savings wouldn't be there because they're paying lower electric rates.
Right. Kind of a reverse negative incentive.
Right.
Yeah.
Bruce is asking, what were the sources for the finding of the 2.3 COP, and is that consistent with other findings?
Just my awareness of a number of different field studies that have happened, including a couple of them that haven't yet been published in New York State. But yeah, so I mean, certainly some studies have shown lower COPs, but some have shown higher, and I think that's in the middle, and it's consistent with what I've been telling, you know, people who are planning programs or doing, you know, design of projects to expect in New England. You know, something around 2.2, 2.3 is a pretty solid number that you can expect on a sort of a fleet basis.
I think we may have hit most of the questions, unless other panelists see stuff that I missed.
Well, if I could just caveat, Bruce, as a heat pump aficionado, what is the COP you get by being very, very focused on it in your house?
I did measurements the first winter that I was running the heat pumps, and I'm in southern Vermont in about as cold of a climate as any of this West or Mass area. And I think I got to 2.8.
Okay,
That's
what I was wondering.
Lucky that I picked a particular heat pump that on their specs, you know, you couldn't really tell, but it turns out from some of the lab testing that I've done with load-based testing, just happens to be a good performer compared to its HSPF rating. So yeah, it's you can't do much better than that, I can say.
My point is my point is the importance in the customer follow-up and in what the behavior is of the homeowner.
To me, that's like one of the,
and whether the COP
Yeah.
whether the COP is 2.2 or 2.8, if they're using their heat pump, they're going to be saving carbon, and if they're not, they don't save carbon or money. Sorry, Beth.
Yeah, I think that was one of the more significant things coming out of this that I could see is like really a 1-year checkup on people. And I know it would make people a lot happier, first of all. And I know they don't always, when people leave the house for the last time, they might think they know what they're supposed to do, but like when they actually do it for a while, they may still have questions later. So like having some kind of follow-up, like, and building that into programs, especially whole home, I think, will really pay off, I personally think. I also think that savings guarantee, like that no one really claimed on it, and it made people so much more comfortable, is what I sort of have heard, is a really interesting thing. And then sort of the marketing tips for this customer area, to me, there's a lot of findings for the middle income or enhanced incentives programs that Mass Save has for targeting. So I think there's a lot of great things to learn from this. We will definitely send these slides out and the recording, and we will get them up on our website too, so that, other folks, you can direct them to this program and sort of, we did this so that we'd learn, and I think we learned a lot. So it's great. Thank you guys so much for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. We learned a lot too.
Thanks for everyone that joined.